care about the people around you. Care beyond your family. Your family is hugely important, and I totally understand that. But care just beyond them too. Because the impact that you will have on someone else's life, you don't even know what that is yet. And let it be a good impact, even if it's a benign impact. But let it be a good one.
Disinformation is spreading.
There will be a surprise outbreak.
We only have
as
so many
the issue of pandemic.
No social distancing at all.
They said that they would express their concerns about the mask supply.
Where's the mask? Where's the glove?
One expert says a second
get
wave
away
is
from all of these
We all
people.
need some good news.
A message for all the healthcare workers out there.
Thank you.
If you're looking for hope tonight, raise your hand. If you feel alone and don't understand, if you're fighting the fight of your life, then stand. We're gonna make it through this hand.
From Santa Rosa, California, this is 19 Stories. I'm Cheryl Halling. George Washington III is a voice actor with over 17 years of experience. After spending 20 years in the IT industry, his diverse body of work ranges from radio spots for the Carolina Panthers to national television commercials. He says his proudest voiceover moment was becoming one of the voices of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Music has also been a big part of his life since childhood, and he's used his gift in the opera and classical worlds, most notably with the use of his beautiful bass-baritone as a regular performer with Opera Carolina, the professional opera company of Charlotte, North Carolina, and the oldest continuously operating company in the Southeast. George joins us today, however, to share a different narrative, as COVID has personally touched his family with the loss of his own father, George Jr., after losing his mother 1 month prior to cancer. George Washington III, a very warm welcome to 19 Stories.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining me today. I imagine this is a bit of a loaded question these days, but how are you doing?
Well, it is a loaded question because there's all kinds of things. I speak through a very strange period of time for, in my life, my family's life. I got married in November, just this past November.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Multiple things going on. Got married in November. My mother was diagnosed with cancer in March. I went up there to help in April. She died in May. My father got sick from COVID, and so did I in June. He died in June, and I have just moved in with my wife after 8 months of living in 2 different houses. So, yeah, there's been a lot going on.
A lot to unpack. You got married in November, and then all of this tested your marriage, and a lot to contend with. So how has the current shelter-in-place directives in Charlotte affected your ability to move about, if you will, and really engage with your life and have a marriage?
Well, it affected me in multiple ways. For a few years, I've been the campus director at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting campus in Charlotte. So I would teach and I recruited and I did things like that. When the shelter in place came down in Charlotte, it meant that we could no longer offer on-campus classes, and we suddenly had to offer classes as online and do all the things that were necessary to handle that. Also, because my wife and I weren't living in the same house, we didn't see each other very often. We would have to decide, okay, we're going to go walk, and we'd walk on the Greenway separated from each other and talk about what was going on and all those things, and then we'd go our separate ways. As things started happening with not just the shelter here, her daughter, who had gone to Germany on a study abroad program, had been gone for, I think, 3 weeks and had to turn around and come right back. My kids, who are all my older kids, they all had to stay where they were, one in Asheville, North Carolina, one in Roanoke, Virginia, one who was, she was living with me, and we had to stay in place. And it created, like everybody experienced, a tremendous amount of personal stress to figure out how you're supposed to go about life when you can't just do the things you ordinarily do. I remember doing the shopping just as the stay at home was about to go in place. And maybe this happened where you were too. It has seemed to happen everywhere. There was, low level panic going on. All the toilet paper was gone. All of the
Yeah.
cleansing fluids were
We,
gone.
we're
You
still
know,
trying to figure out that one.
yeah, the toilet paper I still don't get. I mean, it just happened. But you could see the stress and the strain in people's eyes as you're walking through grocery stores while people tried to figure out what was the right thing to do. On the funny side of that, I thought it was humorous that there were some things that people just won't buy, even in a panic. Like there's like tons of brown rice left. Things, there are things people just will not bend their will to, even in a
Isn't
panic
that
like that.
interesting that you would notice that? And yet we're in California, so of course the brown rice would go. Um,
Oh,
right.
sure.
So I think it's geographic.
Yeah. Yeah, North Carolina, not a big brown
I
rice
lived in the South for 2
place.
years. There's not a lot of rice going on. Yeah.
But it was a stressful time, especially, my wife, admittedly, this is both of our 3rd marriages. And so we'd been seeing each other for 4.5 years and saying, okay, this is it. This is what we're doing. And then suddenly we are not able to see each other very much. We can't really make any plans about what was going to happen next. And she, to her credit, Janan was ahead of the game on wearing masks. And I have actually apologized to her to say, you know what? I kind of blew it off early because I didn't think it was that big a deal at first, but you were right from the jump. So I give her all the credit in the world for that.
Well, isn't it interesting that some people still, with all the information and even knowing people, don't believe in wearing masks? And can you speak to that for a moment? Because I know that you have become somewhat of an advocate, rightfully so. First of all, let me ask you, how are you and your brother and your nephew feeling?
Well, we have all fully recovered. The fact that we all got it, that my dad, my brother, my nephew and I all got it basically within a few days of each other. All, in the same location, of course. It just showed you how fast this happens. How easily it spreads and how quickly it goes around. So my brother, he had similar symptoms to me and recovered quicker than I did. My nephew never showed any symptoms. He's 11.
Oh,
So
really?
he got,
11 years old.
yeah,
Interesting.
yes. And it just never really impacted him. He was worried. And as a matter of fact, my brother told him at one point, this is my phone. You know how to unlock it. If something happens to me, call 911 and go with me to the hospital. And, while his wife had to be separated from them because she tested negative. So she was staying in a hotel room away from them. So there was a lot of stress going on there. And I was in my parents' house alone. And I thought about this. I don't know that I had ever spent more than a night in my parents' home by myself in my entire life until I was in their house sick with COVID-19. It's one of those things that I'm trying to be smart about this as I'm looking for a therapist at the moment because I have a lot of things that I'm going to have to unload.
I encourage you because this is a time that no one has ever dealt with, and certainly everything that you have come through. That's a pretty wise decision.
Yeah, I committed to that, and once I was back here and recovered and getting through the move portion of life, I've said now I can start concentrating on doing that. But on the good side, like I said, we have all recovered. I'm trying to walk about 4.5 miles every day so I can start getting back into some kind of health. And my brother's biggest concern is he is a teacher in Champaign, Illinois, and they're trying to figure out what their next steps are to bring those kids back to school.
Mhm.
And I am concerned. He is obviously concerned for both him and his son. And I am shocked at the disregard that people have for teachers' lives in all of this.
It is such a huge topic of conversation because obviously we're a pretty divided country right now.
Hmm.
There's people who still believe that this is not a big deal. And as we've seen the gamut of people of how they respond to it, and now the research on blood type O and how people recover from COVID faster if they have blood type O. But I'm curious, given the number of positive cases that continue to increase, in particular in North Carolina, and I understand disproportionately affecting people of color, how has your own experience affected your desire, as I said earlier, to be an advocate of educating people to help them safeguard against this virus?
Well, I have been pushing very hard on multiple fronts to try and make people aware of the seriousness of this issue. I've been interviewed by a local newspaper, a local television station. I'm going to be interviewed by a regional online paper tomorrow. I have been very outspoken about the need to wear masks, and social distance and do all the things that are necessary, because it is something that, because it happened so fast for us. I got back to Illinois to help take care of my dad on May 31st. On June 3rd, I called 911 to have him go into the hospital,
Wow.
and they diagnosed him with COVID that night. The next day, or that night, I showed my first symptoms, and I was so sick that I lost 20 pounds over the next 2 weeks.
Wow.
My father coded 3 times in the next three
And
weeks.
that was while he was in the
That meant
hospital?
while he was in the
Yeah.
hospital, yes. So his kidneys started to
Mm.
fail. He went on dialysis. They were about to take him to a rehab clinic when he coded again, and he had to stay in the ICU. And then on June 24th, my brother called me about 5 in the morning Eastern time and said they've been working on him for a half an hour. And we both said, we have to call it.
Mm.
There's just no reason to do this to him. He's 81 years old. This is not what he would want.
I'm so
And
sorry.
so, well, thank you. It's tough, but it was necessary. And because of that, because of my father's commitment to public service, because of the kind of experience that we had and I personally had, I have been adamant in telling people, you must wear masks. You must take care of the people around you, not because you need to necessarily think that this is a compromise on your personal
Oh,
freedoms.
yes. Well, that's
It's
a whole other
your,
discussion.
oh, yeah,
Don't get me
yes,
started on that one.
exactly. This is your responsibility as a citizen for the people around you. And maybe it's not for that person sitting directly in front of you, but maybe their grandmother, and maybe their uncle, or maybe their
Or maybe
son,
their father.
or maybe their father.
Mm.
All right, so a couple of weeks ago, I went into a Lowe's, and I was going to pick up something, and I was, no big deal. I was wearing my mask. I saw a lot of other people in there wearing masks, but there were plenty of people who weren't. A lot of young men, a lot of older men, mostly men. And the longer I was in the store, the more enraged I got. And I was talking to the person who was checking me out, an older African American woman who said she had already had family experience with losing someone to COVID. And, we shared that moment. And as I was walking out of the store, I turned around and I yelled into the store, put on your masks.
Did you leave out a certain choice word there?
I did leave out a
Yeah.
word. I didn't think that was
Yeah.
appropriate.
No, that's okay. We
Um,
got the inference.
yeah, so and I know that doesn't help all the people that I've read all these things and heard the stories that trying to shame people and all that doesn't help. But it was so enraging
Mhm.
to watch people act as if this doesn't matter. And knowing from my own personal experience, from talking to other people, from seeing people online, people are dying from this every single day. 1,000 people a day in the country. And people won't accept that it's something real until they see people dying bloody in the street.
This seems to be a theme with a lot of the people that I'm speaking with these days, whether it's racial injustice or COVID injustice, until it affects your family or you personally. Somehow it's not real. So
Right.
I'm curious, when you have personal encounters, I mean, I think anybody who has a chance to have a conversation with someone who's been affected by something, it tends to be, it hits home a little bit clearer. So are you finding there's pushback when you are actually having a chance to speak to someone personally?
There is a little pushback. And again, it all tends to revolve for them around personal freedoms, about getting these things because they don't want people telling them what to do, especially not the government. The government shouldn't be telling me what to do. And my response is, so you don't wear pants into the store?
Yeah, we've seen those memes.
Yeah. You don't stop at stoplights? You're being told what to do all the time for your safety and for the safety of others. This is one of the least impactful things you could do for your personal, put on a mask when you're in the grocery store for 20 minutes.
And yet it could have the most impact, both positive or negative.
Exactly. It could keep someone else from getting sick if you are sick and don't know it.
To be clear, and if you covered this, I mean, I know you've covered this online, but what was the event that affected all? Was it your mother's memorial service where you were gathered and this was spread?
We think that what happened in talking with my brother, that it was not at the memorial service specifically, but afterwards at the
Mm,
house. And some people, not a lot, we tried to keep it under control. A couple people came in that he and I didn't know and weren't family, and came in to talk to dad because, as I mentioned, my father had many years of community service. He served on the county board in Kankakee County in Illinois for 33 years. And he had worked in a smaller, poorer community in the same county when he first moved there, for many years as well. So he was well known for helping build a youth center and helping get a library established out there. And
beautiful.
people really, yeah, and people wanted to, give their condolences to him for
Sure.
the loss of my mother. And so that all happened. And then I came home for a week, and when I went back, and my brother was telling me he's not the same. And of course, the both of us were attributing that to depression,
Sure.
loss, and it turned out it was that and more. So we think that it happened the week before I left is when he was actually infected, and I got it because came back that following Sunday, and I was with him all day, every day for those couple of days, even helping to try and pull him off the floor after he had fallen. And I put myself in a position by being his 24-hour care of just being exposed.
And I think that is such an important part of the message as well, because it is summer. People are traveling. They're taking road trips, going on vacations, stopping at friends' homes. The message is pretty clear that unless you live together, to not gather. And that's a really hard thing for us to wrap our head around.
It is not human nature. Human nature is to gather, it's to be in groups, it's to be social. And I understand the difficulty of it because I could not talk my father out of not having a memorial for my mother. I tried to say, Dad, this is probably not a good idea. We really shouldn't do this. And he was adamant, and understandably so. So we did it, and we did it with a small group of people from family. And, in the end, was that the issue? Possibly, probably. But we can't stop people from wanting to be together. But we can ask them to take this extremely slowly and carefully.
Hmm.
And this is something that, I know people say it's not as deadly as the flu, and it doesn't spread as quickly as measles. No, but it's right down the middle. And again, we have zero ways to stop it right now. And that's the thing that human beings can't factor that in. Most people can't.
Well, and it also when people say, "Well, it's like the flu," well, no, the flu has a fatality rate of 50 to 65,000 a year. We have tripled that in less than 6 months.
Yes.
And the fact that we don't have vaccines and we don't have any proven way to mitigate the spread other than what we're talking about, wearing our masks, social distancing, washing our hands. So I'm curious, in light of everything that we're talking about, because life still needs to go on, but how has this affected your professional voice work?
Well, once went to help take care of mom and dad, there was a turn. There was a slowdown for most of us. From businesses stopped trying to do it, didn't do as much advertising. They were still trying to figure out how they should advertise, and people paused on other projects. And so, for the bulk of April and May, and most all of June, I had very little work. Uh, and it really, I mean, that's significant. Now I've gotten some work back, but people don't make up that kind of thing, right? You don't make up 2.5 months
Mhm.
of lost wages and lost income. So it has significantly impacted me on a professional side. I was doing some coaching. I had to stop, especially when I was sick. Um, I was trying to coach while I was taking care of my folks, and there was some humor and some sadness in that, because as I was working with people, I had to say, "Hey, stop. My mother's calling me. I need to go take care of them," while I was sitting in my childhood bedroom. You know, right? I'm sorry, I'm 52 years old, but my mom's calling, so I got to go take care of
Yes,
her.
yes.
And so, there was some funny stuff in that, and there was some sadness in that, because it was to that point, I hadn't realized this. I wasn't, well, I knew it, but she hadn't really accepted it yet, that these were my mother's last days.
Mhm.
And at a certain point, I kept coaching until the day of her memorial, and that was when I stopped.
For our listeners who may wanna reach out to you regarding coaching, what kind of coaching do you do?
I work with Such a Voice as a voiceover practices and first skills coach. So I'm teaching them how to, what their first things they should know about how this works, how they should work on scripts, how to interpret them, and things like that. So that's who I've been working through.
Okay, and is that something that's available to the general public or that is
Yes,
oh, it is, okay.
yes,
And I digress. I can only imagine those are moments of grace, maybe the humor, to even finding the humor of you're caring for your dying mother, and yet you're coaching and trying to find the balance emotionally to continue on and yet be there for her. And
yeah,
think the nation's been affected as far as their professional work, and thinking about the amount of people who are unemployed right now and trying to figure out how to pick up life and re-enter life. And it's good to hear that business is picking up for you. That's got to be some solace for you to know that you can make your bills and pay your rent.
yeah. It is definitely it, the it, I don't normally do audiobooks. But after I had gotten home and had mostly gotten back to being recovered, somebody said, "Hey, I have an audiobook for you. Are you willing to do that?" I'm like, "Okay, yeah." Right. And I will do it. And some other things have come up. So yes, it's starting to get back to something that looks like normal, but this is such an uncertain
Hmm.
time. Um, you saw that, like everyone, the gross domestic product dropped by 33% in 3 months. We've never seen that. Never. And there are so many people who are currently out of work. And for some of us, we're kind of insulated from it. My wife continues to work. Her job has stayed steady the entire time. Things have started to pick up for me back to something resembling normal, at least from an e-learning perspective. But I know people who have lost their jobs, family members who have lost their jobs, people who are in, one of my cousins is a bus driver. He drives for a school system in
No
Illinois.
work there. Yeah. Mm.
No work there, and this is, the impact of this in some ways seems invisible, but it is so large that maybe it's just too hard to grasp. This is not, I mean, you and I both went through the 2018 or 2008.
Oh, yes.
And and that was when I was working for a financial institution, and I managed to make it a year after that before they let me go. And this is worse than that. and it's hard to even see it.
Um, Recently, you donated antibodies, and I understand it's called convalescent plasma. Is
Yes,
that correct?
that's correct.
How exactly is that used?
Well, right now, the Red Cross and multiple agencies are using convalescent plasma to essentially look for the antibodies that we have generated and see if those antibodies can be placed in other people to lessen their symptoms and quicken their recovery. So it's not a fully approved process yet. They're still working on how effective it is and all that. But I felt like I had to do something to help people if I could.
Mhm.
I've given a lot of blood in the past. I've been kind of lax in getting that done in the last few years. But it was when I realized that was a thing I could do after I had done a checkup with my own doctor, I said, can I get the antibody blood test just to see if I still have them? And they did it. And the next day it came through, and I signed up with the Red Cross and said, let's go ahead and do it. Now, as I mentioned in one of my posts on Instagram, it is not a great experience. If you've ever done double red or platelet donation, it's the same kind of thing where they are extracting the blood, spitting out what they want to keep, and putting back what you need to keep.
Actually, I am barely able to give blood for a blood test. I have really low blood pressure naturally,
Mm.
so it's almost like they have to siphon it out of me.
Hmm.
I
Right.
wish I could,
Yeah.
although what you just endured sounds painful, and that is a very long process.
About 2.5 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and so you sit if you do it at the headquarters in Charlotte and probably any of the Red Cross established locations. They have you sit down, they do all your pre-tests and all that. They swing a little screen in front of you where you can watch Netflix for a couple of hours while this goes on.
Hey, that's one way to get free
Yeah.
TV, right?
Yeah, it does get you some TV for a while. And usually what they do is they can either give you the take and the return in one hand, or the take in one arm and the return in the other. And it's uncomfortable. It isn't like there's a searing pain or anything like that. It just is a long time to sit with your arms in one position, and the needle has to stay still and all of those things. And it's something that I don't intend to do over and over again if I don't have to, just because it is uncomfortable. But I will do more of it once I'm ready to go back in there and try that again.
It sounds like it's a little bit more than uncomfortable. I think you're being diplomatic. But I think it's wonderful that you are even thinking of giving at this time, considering you're going through your own healing. And I know it's such a large topic to talk about, but when you said that you feel this is not about freedom, it's about whether or not you care about other people. Is there something, I mean, we touched on it a little bit, but is there something you wish folks were just mindful of, that they could just grasp in how we can care for and nurture each other?
So when I say that, I think about it in terms of the. So I'm a bit of a sci-fi nerd. So I was a fan of the movie Interstellar, and the quote that specifically got me about this was when Dr. Mann, who was Matt Damon's character, pointed out that we have gotten to the point as humans that we can't care about anything beyond our line of sight. We will care passionately and deeply about the people immediately around us, but beyond that, we won't care. Now, in many ways, that's not exactly true. That's, people give to churches, people give to non-governmental entities, the Red Cross, March of Dimes, United Way, do those things. But this situation right now is calling for people to care in a different way, in a way that may not actually impact them directly, in that they're not pulling out money from their pockets and giving it to someone, but it is asking them to do an act that shows that this matters to you. And what I would love people to be able to do is think about it when they are going to whatever grocery store or whatever restaurant, fast food restaurant, or whatever they're doing, that this is something that is having a direct impact on the people who are serving you in that moment, that those people have put their lives on the line many times because they don't have a choice to serve you, to do something for you. My daughter works at Chipotle, and she's worked there for a couple of years. And she tells me that she's got, most of their orders come in, remotely. And the stores all say, please wear a mask when you come in. But you can go there almost any time and see people walk right in without a mask and walk right out. And they have decided that that this is not important enough for them to do this. And it speaks to me of a little bit of an issue of character there. You're not being asked to do anything any more difficult than you putting on your own shoes, than you putting on your shirt, brushing your teeth. It's not that much harder. And yet we find people who, and you've seen all the videos, people completely freaking out because they are asked to do this one thing. And it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways, because we need to be able to care more about the people around us than this is showing. You want people to do things for you, and so they can do those things, we're asking you to put on a mask. That's it. And some people find that impossible, and it breaks my heart.
So, when you are feeling that heartbreak or that fear, is there a particular faith or meditation or something that helps you through that time?
I know that it's difficult when we look at it as people are supposed to be innately better than this. I look to the people and organizations and things that I see doing the good. What was that? Mr. Rogers, was it look for the helpers?
Yes.
And as a kid, I will admit, I was not a huge Mr. Rogers fan. But that phrase, knowing that there are people out there who are doing everything they can to make this better. One of my friends, his wife is a nurse. I have people who are doctors. I know a friend of mine who is a doctor in New York who was there on the front lines throughout all of this. I know that there is good in people. Sometimes it's harder to get to it. And so we're working through all that. And I look to those people and look for that kind of reminder and inspiration that there are people out there who are doing the best they can and doing all they can to help us get through this. This has been, as you've noted, it's been a crazy time, not just for me personally, but for us as a nation, for this country, for the world, because of all of the combination of this pandemic and the unrest about police brutality and racial equality and all of those things. People are trying to do their best to make this better for everyone. And so I look to those people, I look to those instances to know that we are better than this, and that there are, if maybe not quite enough, but there are a lot of people who are looking to make it better.
I believe so. Is that what makes you hopeful in the midst of this time?
Yes. It makes me hopeful because I think about how far we came from where my parents, my grandparents, I have one living grandparent left. She is about to turn 99.
God bless her.
Yeah. How far it has come from where they were to where we are today, knowing that my mother was followed through a town in southern Illinois just to make sure she didn't stop, that my father had lost jobs because they wanted to make sure that some other guy got it because that black man doesn't deserve it. That I was told in high school not to stay at a high school dance that I was DJing because you just shouldn't stay around here after it's over.
It's like the performers in Harlem.
Yeah.
You can have white clientele, but as a black performer, that's what you do.
And I know that we've come a long way from the worst of those times. My father could tell you about the idea of the Green Book and what it really meant. And, that was safety for them, knowing where they could stop and that sort of thing, where I can drive anywhere in the country, supposedly, and be fine.
Mhm.
So I know we've come a tremendous way from where that was. And what I'm hoping is people can see that, and people are in the streets every day now trying to make this better for everyone. And I'm trying to find that place for me too, because in light of the loss of both of my parents and their commitment to doing things for their communities. I mentioned my father. My mother was an election judge and an election, helped out with elections for 36 years. I can do more. I can be someone who can help. And I look to those other people, look to the helpers, and they help me give some hope to this being better.
Well, and that is in your DNA. And the best way you can pay homage to your parents is to carry on their legacy. And, I do believe sometimes in the most desperate times, they're used for good because that's what it takes to shake things up.
Yes.
Um, and as painful as it is, it could just really be the catalyst for change. I would love to talk about your involvement with the museum, with the African American Museum, and how you came to be one of the voices, and which voice was it, and what great joy and pride there is to be involved in that.
This was a project that one of those things that a lot of when I tell young or new voice actors when I'm talking with them is I tell them a lot of your work will come from referrals. That is why you need to know other people initially, and then for a long time people will be saying I know a person, and they will point them to you. This was a referral. Rosie and Brian Amador, who are voice actors in Boston. They are also musicians. They're great musicians, bilingual voice actors, Spanish and English. They had been contracted to provide the Spanish voices for the National Museum of African American History and Culture app. And they said, "Do you know an African American man?" And they said, "Yes." And they pointed to me.
Beautiful.
And it was the project was telling the stories of some of the objects in the museum. So when people would go in, they could bring up the app and they can see and get me telling the story of the object. And we had multiple sessions to do the work. I remember one a painting by David Driscoll, which was inspired by the death of the young man in Mississippi. And the name is all of a sudden, while we're talking about it, it's escaping me.
I'm thinking you were referring to Emmett Till.
Yes, it was one of those. If you've ever done a script where you are right and emotionally connected to it, and you really feel. Now we feel it a lot anyway, but in doing this one, I actually had to stop when we were done because it was just too much. You're telling this story about how this child was beaten to death, shot, tied up with a weight, and thrown into the water. And David Driscoll painted a Pietà style painting to commemorate it. And just the fact that we were doing stories like that, talked about, of course, the Tuskegee Airmen, and talked about different things that so many people in America do not know about the African American experience and the African American impact on this country. One of the things, and I am sorry that I haven't been there yet, we were going to go before this year all fell apart. And it is a place that I say, this is not a museum for Black people. This is a museum for everyone in the United States to go and see what we have been about in this country. It is as important as the Holocaust Museum. It is important as any other thing that you see in that space that people need to be a part of. And it was so gratifying to be able to tell some of those stories and be a part of that, knowing that I was trying to communicate history. This year, for instance, when I think it was this year, end of last year, when HBO showed their show, Watchmen. Now, being a comic book guy, I was very familiar with Watchmen, but this was an entirely different interpretation. The beginning of that series showed the Tulsa race massacre. That was the opening scene. And watching on Twitter, seeing people say, I had no idea this happened. I had no idea this happened. And I would say, you need to know this. Everyone needs to know this happened and more. And a good place to find that stuff out is this museum. They talk about it. I don't expect everyone to immerse themselves in the history of the African American experience. But what I would like people to know is that we aren't just what you imagine us to be.
Well, first of all, it is the American history. It's so left out of our educational system that it's one of the reasons people are ignorant to half of our history in this country.
Yes. And what astonishes me about it is people do not want to know that we have done bad things as a country. And I understand the reason why. We want to be proud of where we're from. And we have a lot to be proud of as American citizens and a country in the United States. But we also have to acknowledge that we have done things that have caused incredible pain, incredible suffering, and many times we did that in the name of country.
Mm-hmm.
And those things have continuing impacts. You mentioned the Tulsa race massacre that wiped out a lot of the Black population of Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It is absolutely unbelievable that that happened in our country.
People don't know that Wilmington, North Carolina is a place where the only insurrection ever occurred, where white supremacists essentially drove out the Black mayor, the people who are on the city council, and replaced them with white supremacists. It's never happened anywhere else. And it is not taught in our history. It is something that people say we're not going to worry about that. Let's talk about the things we won. We got out of, we freed the slaves. We won in World War II. We signed the Civil Rights Act, and we're not going to talk about Vietnam. So there's, that's what tends to happen. And I understand, I have what is one of the most American names in history, right? My name is George Washington. I get that you want to be prideful of the things that we've done as a country, but acknowledge that the things that we did that were bad had an enormous, terrible impact on many people. And not be guilty about it. Just know that it happened.
And take the lessons from it. I think, I might be opening up a huge can of worms, but you talk about the KKK taking over government, and dare I say, we might be in that era right now. And I think we need to learn from our history so that we don't repeat. And that is probably, one of the things of your father's generation, my father's generation is. And one of the reasons I actually started this show is because our stories are so important. The voice, both in song, and I'm sure you can appreciate that, and the spoken word is how we pass on our legacy, how we pass on our stories. Moving forward, how do you see both yourself within your community? You shared what you would like to do, and carrying on both your parents' legacy and the work that they've done. But how do you see yourself moving forward? Because something like this is life-changing, not just what's going on in our country, but your personal tragedy and the personal experiences that you've gone through ever since you've said, I do. How do you see yourself moving forward?
I am trying to find the right space for me to be effective, to do things that are going to matter. And maybe, people have, I have friends who said, you should run for something. I'm like, no, my
No.
life is, I have had too complicated and goofed up a life story to do that. However, I am going to sign up to be an election assistant this year, because it is important. You know that many people, they pointed out that the average age of election of poll workers in the United States is 61.
Mm-hmm.
And with this current situation, many of them are too frightened to do the work. Understandable.
Yeah, rightfully so.
Somebody's got to do it, especially in this year when this election is so important to so many people. And I want to come at this from a nonpartisan thing. I want to help people vote. In the past, I've helped drive people to the polls. That's not going to be possible this year. So I'm going to start out my assistance and moving forward with being an election site helper, worker, so that I can start working in that direction. And from there, I'm hoping to find something that I can be a part of that can help move us forward. I'm not, my wife and I have talked about it. You don't have to be a leader. You just have to be able to, you know, answer phones sometimes and communicate. And I do have a tool by being a voice actor and a singer that a lot of people don't have, that I can be effective in a communications way. I've emceed events and things like that.
Absolutely.
So I can find ways to help. I just need to find the right direction for them. But it is a definite goal over the next 6 to 12 months to be moving in a direction where I am contributing and not just taking.
If you had to pick a song or a piece of music that defines your experience for this time, what would it be?
So I will tell you, the day my mother passed, so I was doing hospice care for her. We were doing it at home. And for the previous few days, I was giving her the medication to keep her calm and reduce her pain. And the morning that she passed, I had walked into their bedroom and I saw that she was breathing about 3 times a minute.
Mm.
And I said to Dad, I woke him up and I said, Dad, I think we're at the end here. And he got dressed and we sat there until she passed. And I was reminded of, and this is something I had thought about for a long time, and it's a piece that I like. There's a composer named Howard Goodell, and he wrote a modern requiem called Eternal Light. And I've mentioned to you that I'm not a Christian anymore, but I spent a lot of time in Baptist and Methodist and apostolic churches, and I grew up in the faith. So it's not something that I don't, how can I put this? I don't treat people poorly or differently because they are believers, but it's just not for me anymore. But this piece is by Howard Goodell, is called, it's Lacrimosa, which is the part about tears in Requiem, and he titles it "Do Not Stand at My Grave and Weep." And it's, "Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the frost. I am the softly falling snow." And for me, it spoke for both people who believe and the people who don't. It says, you can go on. You can go forward because I'm at peace.
Mm.
And I sang that for my father that morning. And so that has been that's been kind of a defining piece over the last few months.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful, George. I appreciate you sharing that. I've actually never asked that question to anyone, but because you are a singer and music is a big part of your life, I felt compelled to ask you that. And I do know that there's this beautiful recording of you and your father and your brother singing Amazing Grace. And if I may, I would love to close the show with that if I have your permission.
Please feel free. Absolutely. That is really, that's the only time my brother and my father and I sang together.
Really?
Yes.
Really? It's so beautiful. You would never know that.
Yeah. We just, because I'm 5 years older than my brother, and I live in a different place and all of those things. It just never conspired for us to be in the same place. And that was on the 4th of July in 2013. And I said, we need to record something because we just don't get to do this very much. And we ran through it once and we recorded it once, and there you go.
And it's beautiful. And by the way, what is your brother's name?
His name is Brandon Thomas Washington.
Beautiful job, Brendan Thomas Washington. Thank you, George Washington III, for your time and for sharing your story. And is there something else you'd like to share or talk about as it relates to this time in your life?
I think what I'd most like to share, just more of a reiteration, care about the people around you. Care beyond your family. Your family is hugely important, and I totally understand that. But care just beyond them too. Because the impact that you will have on someone else's life, you don't even know what that is yet. And let it be a good impact, even if it's a benign impact, but let it be a good one.
Amen. That's beautiful. Once again, thank you, George Washington III, for joining me here on 19 Stories. If people would like to get a hold of you, can you please tell us how we can do that?
My website is voevolution.com, and I'm on Twitter at GWIII.
There you go. Once again, thank you so much. I wish you good things, good health, and certainly whatever time you need to talk with someone and process this, because that's really important at this time. And we look forward to continued good work from you. And once again, thank you for sharing your heart and your time with us.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found. Was blind, but now I see.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. When you been there 10,000 years, bright shine as the sun. There's no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved